I'm Realtor Deb Tomorrow, and this is At Home in Bloomington, brought to you by Karen Rostel, Ruoff Home Mortgage. We profile the people, places, and resources that make Bloomington, Bloomington, and help you live your best life. At Home in Bloomington. Hello, and welcome to At Home in Bloomington. I'm your host, Realtor Deb Tomorrow, joined as usual by the best damn lender in the state of Indiana, Karen Rostel.
Hey.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So, per our normal practice, which has only backfired on us once, which we're not going to talk about. So far, Karen, you have no idea who these guests are who sit in front of us, right?
No, not a clue.
Okay, so anyway, if this is the first time listening, we play this little game with Karen. I say it's to help. She's our studio audience and helps us make sure we're making sense.
Yes.
But really, it's just because it's fun to do for Karen's expense.
I need this. I need this every time we record.
Right?
Yeah, it's the excitement in my life.
Yes, right? It's adrenaline, excitement, right. Okay, so last time, or a couple of shows ago, I thought there was going to be a giveaway because the guys walked in that were our guests, and they smelled like soap, so strong.
You know,
because they work like 20 hours a day in a soap factory.
I actually was thinking it was like, I don't know, shampoo or cologne. I had no idea it was
that they were squeaky clean, right?
Yeah,
so,
clean.
And we don't have any T-shirts with company logos. Sometimes people walk in and they have company logos on their T-shirts, and I'm like, oh, that gave up our game. But anyway, so I'm going to help you out because you have no clue, right?
Nope.
Just like normal guys in blue shirts sitting in front of us, right?
Yeah, blue shirts.
Okay, so here's multiple choice for you.
Okay. I always pick B. Oh, so go ahead, give me choices. Sorry.
Okay. Number one, are the guests financial advisors here to talk about how to get started in investing when you don't really have a ton of money? Number two, museum curators from the Mathers Museum. Or number three, sports writers here to talk about IU sports history.
Okay. I have to go with B because I always go with B on a multiple choice. There could be 7 items going all the way down to letter G, and I'm going to pick B. Yeah,
museum curators from the Mathers Museum.
Safe is in the middle. Yeah, like the middle lane. I'm going to go with that.
Right, and you would be incorrect.
I'm incorrect. Okay.
They're sports writers here to talk about IU sports history.
Nice.
So this is going to be really interesting.
Okay, so now I get it because that's why you didn't want to talk, because when you mentioned do your loud
sports writer voice,
I thought you meant for the Bloomington Youth.
Yeah, we were talking about before the show. We were talking about Bloomington Youth baseball. Anyways, so let's get to our guests.
I'm batting 1,000, so that's
there you go. Perfect. Welcome, Doug Wilson and John Decker, who are 2 of the 3 authors of a new book, Unknown, Untold, and Unbelievable Stories of IU Sports. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm going to intro by reading the description. I stole it from Amazon, but I'm assuming one of you guys probably wrote that, right? So for over 125 years, Hoosier athletes and coaches have grabbed headlines with their accomplishments and accolades. Legendary performers and larger-than-life figures have called Bloomington home, and their stories have been passed down through generations. But for every classic tale about a Hoosier athlete, coach, or program, there's another that's been forgotten until now. After gaining unprecedented access to IU archives and longtime employees, authors John Decker, Pete, I'm going to butcher his last name, someone say it for me.
DePremio.
Bingo,
DePremio. And Doug Wilson reveal events and images that were lost for decades, filled with new and entertaining stories of the people who have made IU athletics legendary. Unknown, Untold, and Unbelievable Stories of IU Sports is a must-have for any fan. And then some highlights. And I was really struggling when I was putting together the outline for the show because and I said this in my email to Doug, I said, I don't want to give away any of the stories. I want people to buy the book and read the stories. But there are some really interesting stories about the Olympic trials for the men's basketball. Do you remember this infamous 1997 black football jerseys?
No,
I had just left Bloomington for a period of time.
I was still here.
I was living in Kansas. Ernie Pyle's outlandish automobile polo match, which was really interesting, to raise funds for the IU marching band. A.J. Moye's notorious block against Duke, which I can't talk about without crying. Mm-hmm. The time Sam Bell won the bid for the NCAA track meet without a facility or even bleachers, and many more. So the reason I wanted to do the show is that even if you aren't normally a big sports fan, if you live in Bloomington, you either catch the fever or you wonder what the heck. Like, I have some clients who are kind of like, what is this with the sports? I guess you guys have been in the sports scene for a long time. So do you run into people that are kind of like, what is this?
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, I think, one of the goals of the book was to make sure that it wasn't just about sports accomplishments. I mean, it's about, like you said, a lot about history, a lot about personalities. There's a chapter specifically about women's sports and the development of that. So even though it's obviously a sports book, we've tried to add some things that will be of interest to people, whether or not you're a season ticket holder to football or basketball or what your interests are.
Exactly. And I think that's where I was really coming from, was I wanted people to know that the sports scene here in Bloomington is just part of what makes Bloomington. And that's what this show is about, is what makes Bloomington. I ran into another friend last week who I know you know, Tim Tucker, and I told him that I was having you guys on the show. And Tim is a huge IU fan. He even owns candy striped pants and wears them around town, plays golf in them and whatnot. And he said that there were stories in there that he had no idea about. So certainly you guys dug deep. So tell us a little bit about your background first. So what's your authority on this matter?
Okay, well, I grew up in Bloomington is one thing. I was one of those IU fans growing up, had parents who worked at the university and was just a part of that whole sort of culture. So I've lived that part of it. But then I also was a sports writer and editor for the Herald Times for about 7 years.
Yeah, so you were in it. And when were you, in the early 2000s?
Early 2000s,
yeah,
is right. Yeah.
So when men's basketball went to...
We'll probably talk some about this.
Yeah.
I've had a couple different stints at the Herald Times, and when I came back and started working in the sports department, it was just on the tail end of that surprising run that they had to the championship
with
game.
Mike Davis,
Yeah.
And I always wondered about sports writers. I've known several of the editors. They tended to be my tenants. I cycled through. They just traded off of my apartments.
They're a shifty bunch.
Yes, exactly. And but I mean, how does your expertise? How do you become an expert enough to do that? I just feel like you have so many sports facts and information and terminology. You have to know so much about so many different kinds of sports.
I think a lot of people do, though. You know, to me, a sports reporter and a reporter in general, is about someone who knows how to ask a lot of questions, who knows how to learn. Not really someone with the answers, but someone with the questions and who follows something closely to find out, as much as they can about it and share with others and be a storyteller. And to me, that's what I like to see in a reporter, is someone who will find out things as a quick study and then shares them.
Keep digging. One of the things I want to make sure people understand about the book is that while it's sports oriented, it's not written in a way that if you're not completely, an expert on whatever the sport is, you're not lost. Sometimes, when I watch sportscasters I like sports. I enjoy sports. We have season tickets to the Colts and, watch basketball and whatnot. But when people start saying, from the top of the key in the lane, I'm like, I don't really know what that means, but that guy has the ball and it needs to go over there, And the book is written in a way that you can enjoy it and you don't.
See, that would be my kind of book, because the year I met my husband, and he was a huge Cubs fan, and so I didn't watch any baseball. So I thought, I'm going to watch. There was a big game on that summer, and he was out coaching Little League or whatever here in Bloomington. So I I memorized all their names, and I remember the pitcher. I could see his long hair right now. And anyways, so when Tony got home or got back to my apartment that night, I said, he's like, what'd you do tonight? And I said, I was watching the game, and I'm trying to tell him what happened. And he was like, I know they can't see me, but he put his hands over his ear. He's like, don't, you need to stop. You're butchering it. But I'm like,
you're ruining the game.
Am I not getting? He goes, no. He goes, I go, I tried.
But, like anything, there's human stories at the base of it. And that's really, I think, what this book comes at. So, John, what's your background?
My background is, I came to Indiana, moved here from Iowa to go to school, and have kind of been around IU sports ever since. I worked in the athletic department when I was an undergrad, worked there full time, and have kind of bounced around to some different things, but run websites covering IU sports, editor of a sports magazine that covered IU sports, and now I'm back working in the athletic department. So a lot of different things, but always kind of had a finger around IU sports.
And so how did the book come about? Were you guys just sitting around at Nick's having a beer like, hey, we should?
I think so. I think whether it was Nick's or Yogi's or where it was, I think that whenever we get together, we tell a lot of interesting stories. You talked about, that wasn't, about the made baskets and things like that. We kind of felt like all those stories are told and people know that, but there's a lot of things that kind of happen behind the scenes that may not necessarily be relevant to a particular season that we've just known for a long time that we thought would be fun stories to share with people. So that's kind of my recollection. I mean, it's, about a year and a half ago, we really started to think about it.
Yeah, it's sad thinking about Yogi's because I know we had several lunches there where we talked about the book.
I miss Yogi's too.
That was when I think about, where do I want to go watch the game? That still always comes to mind as one of the possibilities, but it's no longer one. I think another thing that happened as we talked about it was we just recognized that we've known people who've been a part of IU sports for so long. The Chuck Krabs, the Kit Klingelhoffers, the Mark Deals, and others that have just a wealth of knowledge and information that they haven't put into their own books. So we were fortunate to be able to talk with them, and really I think they're at the heart of some things that we definitely didn't know and that we think readers won't have as well.
And some of those characters even go back generations, right? Was it somebody's father was involved as well?
Mark Deal, Dad goes all the way back to the 1945 Big Ten football championship team. So
back when IU football was good.
I think we leaned on them heavily. One of the things about these stories, I think both of us, to some extent, we knew of a portion of the story, but I don't think there was any of these 11 chapters in which we knew the full story before we talked to some other people, whether that was Mark or whether that was Chuck, Lynn Loring for the women's tennis story, and Heather Crow. I think they filled in a lot of our blanks as well.
Yeah, that I wanted to talk. That's on my list to talk about the women's sports, and that is interesting. I guess we can talk about it now while we're here. So I don't know. I never knew this, that we had a very, very. I guess we still do have a pretty good women's tennis team.
We do, yeah.
And they had a run. This was back in the 80s, 82, I think, with Heather Connor was the player that won a national championship. But what was interesting to me was that it wasn't NCAA at the time. So it was called I can't even say it. To me, this is a weird assembly of letters. AIAW, Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. And they were transitioning, and you kind of tell that story. But what struck me about that story was that the NCAA was stepping in and really kind of bullying this association. This group got together and said, we need to have national championships for women in college, collegiate. They had, NCAA had been around, but there was really nothing for women. And so in the early 70s, this organization got together and they started doing national championships. But then you can probably tell the story a little bit better about why NCAA kind of stepped in and decided they wanted piece of the pie.
I think it's because of the piece of the pie. I think that the AIAW was really formed out of a necessity just to provide opportunities for women to compete against other programs. And the NCAA was at that point not interested because they didn't necessarily see a financial component to it. And I think that with Title IX and gender equity, I think that they began to see that down the road that would come about. And at that point, once they saw the potential to somewhere down the road make some money, I think that they decided that they needed to get involved. And certainly that's a long time ago. And I'm not saying that the NCAA's motives these days are the same that they were then, but they came along and pretty much pushed aside the AIAW, which at that point was the governing body for intercollegiate women's athletics.
Yeah. I mean, I felt kind of bad I don't want to call them a bully, but they did kind of do what they needed to do.
They did.
And maybe at the end of the day, maybe, exposure is stronger because NCAA got involved and they've got, probably deeper finances than the collegiate, but it was just kind of an interesting, evolution to watch that program. And what was interesting was that they kind of ran side by side women's tournaments for a couple of years while they were transitioning. So this is just a really interesting story that we hear so much about football and men's basketball to think, tennis. Huh.
And then money matters there too. It does. I mean, that's so much a part of the story of college athletics these days. But even back then and back with tennis, it obviously is an important part of that story.
Yeah. And then the other one that springs to mind was the story about the track and field. And Karen, did you ever know that we had a track and field program? That
I did. I had a roommate in college who grew up with me back in Newcastle, and she ran track for IU. Yeah.
Well, I was amazed to see that they had usually ran up in Indianapolis, and because there were good facilities up here, and the facilities down here weren't that good, and then they decided they were going to try and attract a NCAA championship while they had no facilities, basically, holes in the track and all of that stuff. And so that was an interesting story too. And who was your resources? Do you remember on that one?
On that one, Randy Heisler, who was an assistant track coach at the time at Indiana, and honestly, that was the last story that made the book. And I'm really glad it's in there because, that happened the first time I worked at IU. And honestly, it was my favorite memory. I worked a lot with track at the time. It was my favorite memory of what happened during my first 10 years there because it was such a fascinating story about a roundabout way for a coach to get what he wanted. And what he wanted, certainly wanted to host the NCAA championships, but what he also really wanted was a new track facility. And this was a very unconventional way to go about doing that.
And he kind of went up and talked to the powers that be and pitched it and got approval, and no one thought he was going to get approval. He came back and said to all of his assistants, well, we're putting on a track and field meet. And it was amazing. I mean, there was a lot of scrambling. There was a portion of the story where someone brought out the wrestling team to lay all the sod on the interior of the track as a workout. Like, what's the workout today, guys? We're going to go lay sod. and everybody was pitching in together. And I think that's great because I don't think we see that kind of teamwork. We don't hear those stories often enough.
Yeah, it was definitely a situation where, a week before the track meet, they were not remotely ready for it. And honestly, 24 hours, they probably weren't. I mean, it was right up to the last minute to get ready for that.
Yeah, it's just crazy to think about. Let's go to break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about a few more stories. One that has to do with the $6 million man, which was completely, I had no idea.
I have no idea either.
Right, but he's on my list right there.
I see.
There you go. All right, we will be back. Stick around. You're at home in Bloomington.
Hi, this is Karen Rastel with Ruoff Home Mortgage. Did you know there are down payment assistance programs for first-time buyers? A first-time buyer is defined as having no home ownership in the last 3 years. These income-based programs may help buyers with down payment or closing cost assistance. For additional details, contact me today at 812-606-7653. Ruoff Home Mortgage is an Indiana corporation licensed by the Indiana Department of Financial Institutions. This is not an offer for extension of credit or a commitment to lend. All loans must satisfy company underwriting guidelines. Equal housing lender. NMLS number 141868.
This is your Real Estate Realist. Practical advice on buying and selling real estate based on my experience closing over 800 home sales. We're digging way back into the archives again today. Today's Realist comes from one of my favorite series of episodes of Real Estate Today podcast, Debunking Mortgage Myths. In our last episode, we talked about what it really means when your mortgage is sold and how that's probably not as evil as everyone thinks. So let's clear up another misconception I hear all the time, and that is, I don't want to get my credit pulled until I have an accepted offer on a house. The rationale is that we understand the more times our credit scores are pulled, that can cause our credit score to drop. But here's what you really need to know. Number one, it's true that a bunch of credit pulls can negatively impact your score. However, probably not by much. If you're running around getting every credit card known to man, then yes, it's going to hurt. But if you're shopping mortgages, multiple credit score pulls in a short period of time do not have much, if any, impact. The impact that it might have in your credit score may only be a few points and not enough to make a difference to most people. Number two, it's important to have a lender check your score rather than relying on what the internet says your credit score is, because your credit score will be different depending on who is pulling it. There are more than 25 different algorithms for figuring credit scores, each giving different weight to different aspects of your score. Only a mortgage lender can tell you what your mortgage credit score is. And number three, Also, know your credit score early in the home buying process. Please don't wait until you find your dream home and then have your credit score pulled only to find out there's a mistake that will take 6 months to fix. It happens. I've seen it. So get your score pulled as soon as you start the home buying process. It will give you a more accurate picture of what you can afford and help ensure you never lose your dream home. To learn more about mortgage myths and arming yourself to be a smart mortgage consumer, listen to my Real Estate Today podcast, episodes number 3 and 4. You can find it on iTunes, YouTube, and my website at homeinbloomington.com.
My name is Brittany, and Deb Tomorrow is my realtor. She helped me buy my first home. I enjoyed working with Deb because she was patient, thorough, and made the experience fun. Deb should be your realtor too. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to At Home in Bloomington. Before we get back to our guests talking about their book, Unknown, Untold, and Unbelievable Stories of IU Sports, we have our Facebook follow segment, and I'm going to stick with the sports theme here. One of the things I learned from the book is that there is a lot more to IU Sports than just men's basketball and a sometimes frustrating football program. There are a lot of awesome programs that are worth exploring, and one that I discovered just last year, I guess I jumped on the bandwagon.
We totally did.
Totally jump on the bandwagon. Is the women's basketball team and how fun those games are.
They were really fun.
And I know, Karen, you went and you took your son and...
Oh, yeah. He wanted to sit right behind the goal.
Which you can totally do with
You can if you're younger and you don't need back support.
Yeah, those
but
benches,
it was just bleachers. But it was just real exciting to watch that team.
Yeah. And so I want to encourage everyone to follow them on Facebook. They're real easy to find with IU women's basketball. But the ticket prices are insanely cheap. So it's $45 for a season ticket for adults, which is 15 games. That's $3 a game. Mm-hmm. Right? Did I do that math right? Mm-hmm. That's insane.
Sure did.
And kids tickets are $15, so it's $1 a game. I mean, come on now.
I know. Last year when they said, okay, if they win this game, then Bloomington might be chosen again to do the next round.
Yeah.
But the ticket prices were going to go up, and they went up
$7 or something.
No, it wasn't even. I was like, okay. Well, I thought it was going to jump to 30, 40. No.
Yeah.
No, not at all.
And one of the best deals I found was there, and I don't know if you knew this, if there's a family package. Do you ever do that?
I think that's the one we got this year.
Well, there's a family package, like a single game. It's $28. It's 4 tickets, 4 drinks, and 4 entrees at the concession stand. $28.
That is a value. Oh my gosh.
Beyond, right? That's almost as good as my $60 laptop from the IU Surplus store.
But besides the inexpensive tickets, those athletes were so, I was blown away.
Yeah.
I've never really watched a women's game up close like that, and I was like, I would never try to dribble a ball past one of those.
Yeah. No, it was exciting, it was fun, and it was a great community feel. I loved for the NIT championship game last year. I mean, the stadium was full. I know you missed it.
I missed
Your
it.
son sat 2 rows behind me. It was packed, and it was such a great, community feel. I saw so many people I knew, but everybody was just coming out to support. It was just really, really cool. So for those of you, I'm going to shout out to one of our mutual clients, Piper, who talks about sportsball and acts like she doesn't know anything about sports. This is one of the ones to check out for sure. Okay, let's get back to Doug and John. I want to talk about, we were joking during the break about how we always say, well, Bloomington's so special. Our relationship with sports is special. And, all these things we do are special. And then I'm pretty sure that people from outside of Bloomington laugh at us and they think they're so special.
Yeah, we totally are special.
But we are special. So I want to ask you, do you think Bloomington is different than other college towns in our relationship with sports?
Well, I think one way that's different, and having traveled to a lot of other college towns and seen their sports, is that we have such a big college in such a small community, relatively. I mean, there's a lot of great, say, in the Big Ten colleges and towns, but Madison, Wisconsin, Lansing, Michigan, Iowa City, Iowa, certainly in Michigan as well, at Ann Arbor, those are bigger cities.
Okay.
I think our college really defines our community more so in our culture here, more than you see in a lot of these bigger cities. And I think you can see that. And I think then beyond that, in this relatively small environment, we've had a lot of really special coaches and characters over the years, whether you're talking about Bob Knight or Doc Councilman or Sam Bell, who we talked about earlier, who is that track coach, or Lynn Loring, who
women's tennis.
Women's tennis did not have the best facilities over the years and had these amazing results anyway. And I just think in a small community, it felt different when we've had that kind of success, and you know the people. I grew up across the street from Sam Bell by coincidence. I mean, it's just, it's all right there at home.
It's funny you say that because I have to admit, this is a dirty realtor secret. We identify people by where they live, not in a judgmental kind of way, but like, first thing I always want to know about people is, where do they live? Just because of what I do, that tells the story to me of who they are, right? Do they live in an older house? Do they live in something new? And, whatever. And so as I'm reading the book, I would stop and I'd be like, where does that person live? I would look them all up. Because there was a story about Tim Garl, who is the trainer for the men's basketball team, and he gave up his house during the 1984 Olympic trials for all the coaches that were coming in. Assistant coaches. So Bobby Knight was the head coach, and then for the Olympic team, and then there was the assistant coaches coming in, and Tim Garl moved into a hotel. And I was like, where's he live? Where were these? I don't know why, but like that's how I identify. But anyways, that's just my psychoticness.
Wherever the answer is, it's going to be some place that you're familiar with, and even people who aren't realtors are familiar with, because none of it's that far away. And particularly back through the days that we're talking about, most of these stories, it's been a small community of neighbors and Hoosier hospitality, and the kids that you could, so approachable. You'd see the players on campus and in the community in different places. They say we are IU, and I think people have felt that way over the years.
One of the stories I love too was also the 1984 Olympic trials, where 73 athletes from all over the country came in to go through the tryout process to get on the Olympic team. But this was back before cell phones, and they were all staying in the Union Hotel. But if coaches needed one of them, they would call the hotel, and if they weren't there, they would send out student managers. And where would they go? Go check Nick's. See if they're there. So it's funny. But one of the things that has always struck me is that I feel like even if you didn't go to IU, if you didn't go to college, if you're from Bloomington, IU is your school.
That's right.
I remember years ago, it's probably been 4 years or so, I was involved in a client buying a home, and the woman, we always stalk, like, who's the seller? What's their story? Why are they trying to sell? So we were Googling her name, and she had season tickets for IU basketball for something like 60-something years. I mean, it was insane. It was like and she had been recognized as like having the season tickets for the longest, and and she didn't go to college. That wasn't her thing, but just because she was here, it was her school.
It's something she shared with her family and her neighbors. And it's different now with cable TV and all the entertainment options that are out there, but back in the day, I mean, the mop lady that they show now is a big deal to everyone who's a part of this community, because we planned our weeks around watching those basketball games together with our family and friends
on Channel 4. So there was there's a chapter in the book about soccer, which I'll never understand, but we have a great program, so go soccer. And Todd Yeagley was quoted as saying to be a part of this is big, and he was talking about the soccer program, but I really feel like that sort of speaks to all of IU sports. So just a small part of it, and the legacy and the history is really, really cool. So let's talk about these student manager books, because we were talking about it over the break, and Karen was like, they're like scrapbooks, kind of.
That's what it sounded like.
Tell us the story of these books, because they were a great resource for you.
They were, they started back in I believe 1921, and obviously at this time, in 1920, there's obviously not the internet, there's not email. There's not the means that there is today to keep track of statistics.
It's not a photocopy machine.
Exactly. So these books, they are basically scrapbooks with glued in photographs and taped in newspaper clippings, receipts from trips to other cities, things with the train. But they are the historical record for these teams. And so, quite honestly, at any point after that, if you wanted to know what happened with the 1922 football team or the basketball team, or all the way up into the 1950s, this was really what you had to look at to find out.
It's amazing to think about. I mean, the receipts from the hotels and and of course you look at what it costs and you're like, it's crazy.
Just the fact that you had mentioned that if you wanted this information, it was just in a storage closet, and you would kind of thumb through, I'm presuming, a box to find what you were looking for.
Yeah, we talked about, now, fortunately, these things are now at the IU archives because they are very valuable resources, historical record of all IU's athletic teams, from 80 or 90 or 100 years ago. But at the time when I first started working in athletics in the late 1980s, they were, like you said, they were in a closet, and you went there and helped yourself, and you pulled it out, and you were obviously trusted to look through it and take care of it and put it back. And fortunately, everybody over the years did that because they are absolutely fascinating things to look at. Certainly there's a research component to it, but there were certainly times where if you didn't have something to do, it'd be fun just to go back and look at prices to take the train in the 1920s and interesting things like that.
The quaintness of having a fundraising event so that the team or the fans could go to a game, a whole different way of looking at it than what we see today.
That was we were talking about the Ernie Pyle and organized automobile polo match. It was to raise money for the band so that the band could travel with the football team.
Wow.
Which was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, those stories are amazing. I can't even imagine can anybody go into the IU archives? You have to have a special pass, probably.
Really, I think you can. I mean, you have to contact them and let them know what it is you want to look at because certainly all these things are not on site. So they pull them out and you go into the room and they know what you have and things like that. Yeah. But certainly they're accessible to anybody.
That would be a really interesting if you were doing a school project or something.
Say field trip.
Well, yeah, or a school project to be like, I want to research, the 1945 football team was a pretty amazing story, not just for their accomplishments, but I think at that point in time with the integration, the racial integration, that I don't know, I feel like they did some pretty amazing things. There's a story about Herman Wells and George Taliaferro, who just passed away. The day that I was reading that chapter, he passed away. It was really odd.
Dr. Wells having to threaten to eliminate campus access to the Gables restaurant if he wasn't allowed to go with George there at lunch that day, so, and thereby opening it to.
Yeah, George would have to go home at lunchtime from campus because none of the restaurants would serve him, being African American. And Dr. Wells took a stand on that and really made a change and started integration. So the stories that you read, and it's cool to read about, the Gables and different restaurants, and they talk a lot about the hotels downtown, what's that building? I never remember its name because I always say it's the one with Argentum jewelry in it, which tells you where my mind is. The corner of 6th and College.
Grand Plaza.
Thank you. Grand Plaza, which was a hotel that a lot of people stayed in, and a lot of people associated with the university. And just to kind of hear those stories and sort of try to envision what town was like back then. Our last show that we did, we were reading a quote from about a comedy festival, and someone came in and they said, from Canada, and they said our town square was reminiscent of Back to the Future. I was like, I guess, maybe, but so you're kind of envisioning that. What are some of your other favorite stories?
One of mine, 1984, the U.S. basketball Olympic trials being in Bloomington. I think it's fascinating just because they were here, but also that is one of the legendary U.S. basketball teams, one of the all-time great teams. And
was that the last team that was college students? Did they go professional after that, or were there a few more years?
I believe there was one more. I believe there was still 1988.
Because it's totally different now with that because they have the professionals and those college students don't have any choice. But one of the part of that story that I thought was fascinating was that the NBA draft happened while all of these players were on campus. And this was the year Michael Jordan was drafted, and I think Charles Barkley and some of those players that even you and I know, Karen. But they were on campus training and practicing and trying out for the Olympic team. And, nowadays, this NBA draft is, Madison Square Garden, the fancy suits, the big, the press and all that stuff. And here it was like, hey, congratulations, you got $1 million signing bonus, Michael Jordan, and he's back at practice the next day.
It was, another Jim Butler shared a lot of that story.
Yeah.
Jim was the video director for a long time in the athletic department and had worked for WTTV. And so he kind of coordinated working with all the players as they were drafted. So he shared the story of how he was sitting in a room just like we are today, where he's sitting here with Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing and just, sharing stories as they get ready for the draft.
Right. And then they would get drafted and he would take them. They would have a short little interview and then they would, go back to practice.
I can't wait to read this book.
It was just really interesting to think about, envision, Michael Jordan just gets up the next morning and goes to play for Bobby Knight, be $1 million. That's crazy. Also to think that the signing bonus was only $1 million. Do you think that led me to wonder, that was just from 1984 to today, that the NBA draft process has changed so much, and obviously college athletics has changed. Any thoughts on the direction that college athletics is going? Now, that's a big question, I know, but are we going to have more stories in 20 to 50 years, or is it going to, I guess I get stressed out about it getting so commercialized that we lose the charm.
Well, as someone who reported on college athletics, I think a lot of that charm that we're talking about is gone already. I mean, it's not just that there's so much money, but it's such a managed endeavor now. The schools have so much on the line with their reputations and the amount of money that they're investing in all the facilities that are wonderful. But as a reporter, there's less and less access to these athletes all the time. It really would take something special to get these behind-the-scenes stories now, because that information is carefully guarded and manicured and shaped. And, we used to go watch practice. You're not going to go watch practice anymore.
Yeah.
If you want to talk with one of these athletes, you're going to make a formal request. And you're probably, if you can get to talk with them one-on-one, that's special. Usually it's going to be with a pool of other reporters there asking a variety of different questions and being carefully managed by a staff member from whatever that institution is.
So did it used to be you'd pass them in the hallway and be like, hey, can I talk to you for a second?
It used to be a lot more that you could at least request a one-on-one interview. And back when we're talking about, the days before I'm a reporter, I'm sure you could talk with them and have all the access that you wanted. Now, if you try calling a reporter, if you tried talking with a player who you happen to just run into, you could lose your press pass for a while. It's a serious business with how they manage information now. And you can see why. But it definitely changes what you're talking about, I think. And so it was nice to have the opportunity to talk with some of these players and people as a part of doing this book, because once they're out and doing other things,
and
you
they're free
certainly
to
talk with them again. One of my favorite stories was John talking and writing about A.J. Moye, who I think you mentioned that story. And he's on the cover of the book. And the block and all that is so memorable, and that whole series of games. But one of my favorite little anecdotes in the book was John talking to AJ about the struggles that he had after he had a stroke. And he talked about how he felt like he had gotten 80,000 emails from IU fans of support. And that's that community that I think is really exciting. AJ was one of my favorite characters on the team to cover. He would always have a lot to say when you talked to him, no matter what, good or bad. AJ was colorful and lively and cared a lot, and the fans cared about him. You remember those famous AJ Moye chants at Assembly Hall. I think more of him than any other player I covered that was particularly memorable.
He would smack the floor all the time.
To see what that still means to him today and what he still meant to the fans, I thought was a special moment that was covered.
I'm going to have dinner with AJ Moye. That's my goal now. That game, it's 2002, and they played Duke. And I remember everybody, I was living by myself at the time, and people were like, come watch the game. And I'm like, no, I need to be alone for this. I can't take it, because I was an undergraduate in the early 90s when we lost to Duke. Alan Henderson and Calvert Chaney. So the whole Duke thing is very personal to me. And so, I was literally sprawled out on top of my coffee table, in hysterics, because it was the most stressful thing I'd ever watched. And as soon as the game was over, my phone started ringing. And it was some people from college who knew just how it was just such a big deal that we won that game. And I still go back to YouTube because you can watch a condensed version of the game. I watch that probably a couple times a year when I'm feeling down. I'm like, oh, it's time to watch the highlights of the Duke IU game. And I'm not a huge sports fan, but just that passion, that was
the pandemonium, the glee in the streets after that was unforgettable as well. People didn't expect to win. Duke was a number one seed, and it was just an explosion out of the bars as the game ended.
It was amazing. That was a fun year. So okay, well, I promised Karen that we would talk about the $6 Million Man real quick before we end the show. So the $6 Million Man is mentioned in the book, not for his bionic powers, Lee Majors, but he actually went to school at IU.
He did.
Briefly.
He spent a very abbreviated time on the Indiana football team.
Yeah, and then was asked to leave. No shame in that, right? We've all been asked to leave places before. But yeah, I and there's a lot of stories like that. There was
known as Harvey Urey, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. His name was different at the time. It wasn't Lee Majors.
It was what, Harvey?
Yeary, Urey. From
I
Kentucky.
can see why he would change it to Lee Majors.
But the book had some really interesting stories of all kinds of names, and you go, I didn't realize that person or that the Cincinnati Reds did spring training one spring in Bloomington.
Wow!
During the war, because they weren't allowed to travel too far because of rationing and things like that, and so they're like, well, we'll go to Bloomington. I don't know. That seems an odd decision to me.
No, because we're special.
Right. That's probably why, right? I don't know how their season was, but, there's just all these special touches. So the book is available. You can go to iupress.indiana.edu. So IU Press would be a good place to get it. It is also at Barnes & Nobles and all your favorite online booksellers. There's paperback and hardback, which would make a fabulous gift, I think. And there's also electronic, and I'm going to try and convince them to do an audio version because I think that'd be fun. I don't know. Okay, so Unknown, Untold, and Unbelievable Stories of IU Sports. Thank you so much for being our guest today, and I really enjoyed the book, and I know other people will too. It's not just for sports fans, it's for people who want to feel that connection to Bloomington.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you for tuning in to At Home in Bloomington. We'll be back next time with another great episode.
Got a show idea? I'd love to hear it. And be sure to contact me for all your real estate needs and questions too. You can email me at deb@realrealestatetoday.com and follow me on Facebook at Deb Tomorrow Realtor. To contact Karen Rastel for all your mortgage needs, call 812-606-7653 or log on to ruoff.com and go to the Bloomington Center. Thanks to all the Bloomington people who make production of At Home in Bloomington possible. Special thanks to superstar producer Rachel G. Gregorio, digital guru Cynthia Hogan at Monster Digital Marketing for website design and hosting, and video genius Wes Lasher in the production house for engineering the show.